There are dozens of YouTube videos about Annapurna Circuit, but they all have one big problem. They tell only about crossing the high Thorong pass, not about the real circuit. The 10-day section they enthuse about is only about 1/3 of the original circuit, if even that. So welcome to the Annapurna Circuit time machine, and let's turn the calendar to October 1984. After getting the compulsory trekking permits from the immigration office and seeing the Kathmandu sights, we had to find a bank where to cash and exchange our traveler's checks. We needed small denomination notes and even coins to pay for our food along the way. Next step was a bus to Dumre, traveling on the roof of the bus, the only proper way to travel in Nepal. The circuit started at about 600-meter altitude in lush subtropics. Through endless rice paddies and farming villages minding their own ancient businesses. Locals walked the same trails, often sitting under the shade of the old pipal trees. Curious children were everywhere, dozens of them. We stopped by a school to drop them a bundle of notebooks and a few dozen pencils we had brought with us. Tea shops and lodges were primitive, if there were any. Water was sterilized with Lugol's solution using a dropper. Tea shop kitchens had open fire and everybody just gathered around it for tea and dinner, which was always dal bhat. As there were no wheeled traffic, bridges were primitive, often reconstructed after every monsoon. If we happened to see fresh meat available, we would buy some and cook it at Riverside Camp in the evening. Then there was also time to tend to blisters by our expedition doctor. After 4 or 5 days the trail started to rise and Manaslu appeared in the horizon behind the rice paddies. This is classic Annapurna Circuit at its best. After Tal we entered the Tibetan cultural influence where building, religion, people and customs changed from the Indian to Tibetan. As a curious side note, our group guide in 1986 was Babu Chiri Sherpa, who later in life gained great fame as Babu Chiri Sherpa, the strongest and fastest Everest climber ever, and still the only one who has stayed 22 hours at the summit without oxygen. But that would happen over 10 years later. We were among the very first trekkers to hike the high Ghyaru Ngawal route to Manang, and as there were absolutely no lodges anywhere, we camped on the flat roofs of the Ghyaru village. We did not even know the name of the village, as the copies of the old Indian topographic maps were widely inaccurate. Manang at the end of the valley was better developed. It actually had a lodge. One. There was even a sign advertising different foods, and then sleeping bad, costing 2 rupees. Actually, that 2 rupees for sleeping bad was about 11 US cents at that time, while a plateful of momos cost 45 cents. We could eat at the lodge, but again tents were pitched on the roofs of the nearby buildings. As we had a rest and acclimatization day here, it was a good time to hit the haystack. Village still was like it had been for hundreds of years, people working, like making gunpowder from sulfur, charcoal and saltpeter for the flintlocks. A young dandy with his new sports horse. Girls hauling manure. Only prayer flags, no electric lines or satellite dishes. In the morning we started the long hike to Thorong Pedi, as there were no lodges between Manang and Pedi at that time. In 1984 we started early for the pass, but arrived well before sunrise. Wrapped in our sleeping bags, we waited for the sun. Now what? Machine is acting up. Some time warp. There. Two years later we got caught in a snowstorm, and the crossing took almost 14 hours with 2 members suffering from AMS. Snow in places came up to my armpits. But again we made it across safely to bathe in the holy 108 water sprouts of Muktinath temple. The second half of the circuit, which most visitors now give a miss, follows the Gandaki river valley. Hot and dusty with bad trail sections in places. Not everybody had been lucky. Bridges have to be rebuilt after every monsoon. October is harvest time at this altitude. On both trips we climbed to Dhaulagiri Icefall, a 1600-meter vertical climb for some views across the Gandaki valley, world's deepest. A side trip nobody does anymore, as nobody hikes this part. At Poon Hill there were maybe a score of other foreigners. A side trip to Annapurna Sanctuary, the only proper name for the place, started from Thorong, where a trekking group had some impromptu theatre play going on. The only hotel along the way to Sanctuary was at Hinku Cave. A hotel, yes, at least in the sign, that is. This icefall from Annapurna south does not exist anymore, only bare rock. Glacier from Hinsuli came down to almost where the present-day lodges are. This is the only teahouse on the whole sanctuary route. Here we heard from a shortwave radio that Indira Gandhi had been murdered, so the date must have been the 31st of October 1984. Time to fill the diary and do some shaving. We had brought some chocolate and terry pine shavings from home to make an offering to the local gods and to get blessing for the half year of travel across Asia that was still ahead of us. There were no roads west of Pokhara at the time, so there still was almost a week to go to reach Pokhara on foot. We also met a guy who was the first one ever to carry a mountain bike around Annapurnas. In 1986 we drove the last 10 kilometers along the riverbeds to the edge of town and visited the Tibetan refugee camp there. I hope you have enjoyed time travel with us. Annapurna Circuit of old will never return.